Hello everyone and welcome to my channel CBSE SST Guide, and I am your social science mentor. So today we are going to discuss about the 7th chapter of Civics Class 10 Outcomes of Democracy. So we will be looking at the most common board question and answers that often come for this particular chapter. So let's have a look. Now, in this chapter, the very first question that I have today is a 3 marker. So, this question, as you can see, the answer would be the same, but the type of question, differs. The language of it differs. So, it's the same answer, right? So, why do we feel that democracy is a better form of government than any other form of government? The other way to twist the question is, how do you feel that democracy is better than any other form of government? Explain. Or another way to twist the question is, democracy is more effective than its other alternatives. Justify. Right? So where will we find this answer? It's plainly written here. So democracy, so please design your answer according to the question. So democracy is a better form of government, or democracy is better than any other form of government, or democracy is more effective than its other alternatives because it promotes equality, enhances dignity of the individual, improves the quality of decision making, provides a method to resolve conflicts, and allows room to correct mistakes. So these are your 5 points. Usually this comes as a 3 marker, but if it comes as a 5 marker, you can definitely elaborate upon all of these points. Now, this is the major crux on which the whole chapter is dependent upon. So the whole chapter will discuss about these main issues as far as democracy is concerned. Right? Now, a very important question that we will next discuss is, democracy is seen to be good in principle but felt to be not so good in practice. So justify the statement with suitable arguments. So this particular sentence is actually taken directly from the textbook, right? So here you can see in the very first page only, the sentence is mentioned, democracy is seen to be good in principle but felt not to be so good in practice, right? So obviously we are not going to write all of these questions, but we are going to find the answer that democracies are very different from each other in terms of social situations, their economic achievements and cultures. So what has been achieved in one democracy may differ from the other, right? So as far as socio-economic and political problems are concerned, democracy is in a position where it can address the problems. However, we need to be very careful so not to blame the idea of democracy in case all our socio-economic political problems are not met. Because the very first step towards thinking about the outcomes of democracy is to recognize that democracy is a form of government. It's not a tool, or it's not a person, or it's not even a government. It is a form of government, right? It is the soul of a government. It can only create conditions for achieving something. So we can only make a difference. And democracy creates the situation which enables us to change our social and economic problems. So the citizen has to take advantage of these enabling conditions of democracy, and reasonably we can expect that if democracy is there, then we can solve our problems on our own, which of course is not at all possible in a non-democratic country, right? So this should be your argument when you are writing the answer to this question. Democracy is seen to be good in principle but felt not to be so good in practice, right? Now let's go further on. Now, accountable, responsive, and legitimate. Now, these are keywords, very very important three keywords for this particular chapter. Why? Because you may get a question, a combination of question on the government's accountability, its attitude as far as whether it's responsive or not, and of course, how does democracy produce a legitimate government? So let's take a look, right? Um, Now, before we go into these three keywords, there is a question, a one marker question, or it can be added on to a further three marker question. Let's take a look. What is transparency in a democracy? Right? So, a democracy ensures that decision making will be based on norms and procedures. So, if a citizen wants to know if the decision was taken through the correct procedure, then he or she can definitely find out. She has the right and means to examine the process of decision making, and this is known as transparency. In India, we have a separate law for it. It's called Right to Information, or RTI. I'm sure you've heard of it. This is what, it's a tool for us which enables us to find out the inner workings of the government. And this is how we get to know whether our democracy is transparent or not. Similarly, other democratic countries around the world have similar processes to showcase its transparency. A three marker can be for this type of question is, how do democratic governments ensure transparency? Explain any 3 points. So here you have to definitely mention what is transparency, and the 3 points as to how governments ensure transparency is: one, by this particular point, a citizen who wants to know can definitely examine the process of decision making. And it is a right to expect in a democracy to produce a government that follows the procedures and is accountable, right? So we can also expect that the democratic government develops these mechanisms for citizens to hold the government accountable and mechanisms for citizens to take part in the decision making. So these are the three ways in which democratic governments can ensure transparency, right? And of course, another way to do is, of course, to hold regular, free and fair elections, open public debates on major policy, and that is how through these legislations, we get to see our parliament in debate. There are so many policies which are discussed, in open forums and media. So this shows the transparency, the level of transparency of the government. Right. Now, going back to that, those three key words: accountability and responsive and legitimate. So, question that comes from there is, how is democracy accountable and responsive to the needs and expectations of the citizens? Analyze, right? So, from here, we have to see that accountable, right? So, it is held responsive or accountable when it takes open legislations, when it takes free and fair elections, right? So democratic governments have greater success in setting up regular, free and fair elections and setting up conditions for open public debate. However, democracies do not have a very good track record when it comes to sharing information, right? And we can say that, however, they fare better in these aspects than a non-democratic regime, right? It is also expected that the democracy will be attentive. So here comes the responsive part: attentive to the needs and demands of the people, and it will be largely free of corruption. However, on these two counts, again, the democratic countries often frustrate the needs and often ignore the demands of a majority. Right, so there are tales of routine, corruption. However, we cannot say that a non-democratic government fares any better in these particular accounts. Of course, a non-democratic government cannot even be expected to be accountable. We need to understand. So when you're writing the answer, you need to constantly shift these, arguments that in a democracy, we can expect the government to be accountable and responsive. If they are not, then that is the fault of the government, not the institution that is democracy. However, in a non democratic government, you can't even expect the government to be accountable or responsive. So, this is the key factor that differentiates, right? This is what makes democracies accountable and responsive. And from country to country, the variation, sort of depends on the government, right? So the next question is, democratic government is a legitimate government. So support the statesman. So is a democratic government legitimate? So how can we say that a democratic government is legitimate in the first place? So we know that a democratic government can be slow, can be less efficient because there's so much deliberation and discussion, right? But this is exactly what makes a democracy because it holds the government accountable. The people are there to listen to the decisions. They are part of the decision making, and this is why it can sometimes be slow and less efficient, right? And that is why there is overwhelming support for the idea of democracy all over the world. Because we see now, you can give example that throughout South Asia, we see that the support exists. Why? Because the people wish to be ruled by the representatives elected by them. They also believe that democracy is suitable for their country. So democracy's ability, this particular sentence, democracy's ability to generate its own support in itself is an outcome that cannot be ignored, right? So the reason why a democratic government is called legitimate is because the people are a part of decision making. The people vote and elect the leaders to power. So this is what gives the government its legal, rightful, legitimate status, right? Now, moving further on to the chapter, again we see a very important 5-marker question that may be asked is, explain the role of democratic governments in reducing economic disparities. Or the same question, democracies do not appear to be very successful in reducing economic inequalities. Explain, right? So we see, so here you have to of course explain the growing disparities between the rich and the poor within a democratic country, right? Although we see that dictatorships have slightly a higher rate of economic growth, however, the difference in the rates of economic development between less developed countries in democracy, in dictatorships and democracies are negligible, right? So you have to pick and choose, and this is what makes this particular chapter a little difficult. But if you try to reason out your answers, it will not be that very, it won't be so complicated to find your answers, right? So first you need to show that dictatorships seem to be slightly better off. But again, we see that in case of less developed countries, there is hardly any difference in as far as economic success stories as far as dictatorship or democracies are concerned. There's hardly any difference in the rate of economic development, right? But we can expect that a democracy will not lag behind in this respect as far as economic prosperity is concerned or not. However, we do see, right, that there are a lot of economic inequality. So you have to come to the next page. We see that parallel to the process of bringing individuals into the political arena, which a democracy does on equal footing, we do find growing economic inequalities. A small number of ultra rich enjoy a highly disproportionate share of wealth. And not only that, their share in the total income of the country has increased. So those at the bottom of the society keeps depending upon them and they suffer. So their income has been declining. There sometimes they find it difficult to meet their basic needs of life, such as food, clothing, house, and education, etc. So we see that democracies may not have have been accompanied by a lot of economic growth. Yes, there are economic inequalities, but again the expectation and the hope that we can turn the tide and we can change this economic disparity, that expectation in itself is an outcome of democracy, right? So here you can again further move on to the answer. The poor constitute a large proportion of our voters, and no party will like to lose their votes. And yet, democratically elected governments do not appear to be as keen to address the question of poverty. So, the situation may be worse. So, here you have to give examples of India and Bangladesh, and then answer whether or not the economic disparities. So the question, democracies, whether or not they have appeared to be successful enough to reduce economic inequalities, has been successful or not, right? So this is an argument based question. So you will find the answer in this, both the subdivisions, economic growth and development, and of course reduction of inequality and poverty. Now a one marker question that is asked is, how can you say that democracies are based on political equality, right? So it's a very simple answer. Democracies are based on political equality because all individuals have equal weight in electing representatives, right? So this would be a very, very simple direct answer to the question, that democracies are based on political equality because all individuals have equal weight, right? So equal vote and equal right, irrespective of caste, creed, or gender, right? Now another important 5 marker question is, on the basis of which values will it be a fair expectation that democracy should produce a harmonious social life? Explain. So can it produce a harmonious social life? And here democracy has of course done a wonderful job, right? So when you start writing this question, you will definitely have to give an introduction. So you will write that no society can uh, you know uh, fulfill its harmonious societal expectations. It cannot fully and permanently resolve conflicts among different groups. However, in a democracy, the condition is created where we can respect others' differences and we can evolve into an inclusive environment rather than an exclusive one, right? So it is necessary, of course, to understand. So herein you have to start the answer, that it is necessary to understand that democracy is not simply ruled by majority opinion. It can never be that. The majority always needs to work with the minority so that the government can function to represent the general view, where majority and minority opinions are not permanent. That is why whether majority or minority, they have to constantly work together to handle its social differences, divisions, and conflicts, right? The next point would be, it is necessary to see that the rule of majority does not become rule by majority community in terms of religion, race, or linguistics. So mostly we see that rule by majority in the case of elections. We see that different groups of people, different persons from different backgrounds can form a majority. So in that case, a democracy remains so long as every citizen has a part, has a chance to be a part of a majority at some point of time, right? At the same time, you can definitely add, the fact that in a democracy, individuals have been it creates conditions where individuals are respected for being individuals, and it does not have to look any further into his caste, creed, identity, etc. So democracies throughout the world has given that respect. In the case of, for example, you can take the example of women, and of course in our country many minorities, Dalits, etc. Right? So this would be more or less, suffice as your answer. On the basis of which values will it be a fair expectation that democracy should produce a harmonious social life? So this is a way in which you can, pick the various points and write your answer, right? Another question is, how has democracy ensured dignity to citizens, right? So democracy stands much superior to any other form of government in promoting dignity and freedom, right? There is no comparison here. Early on, as far as accountability or whether it is legitimate or whether it's responsive, there are comparisons with dictatorships. But as far as giving dignity and freedom to its citizens, there is no comparison. There is no other government that can give or ensure and protect the dignity of citizens than a democracy does, right? So here again, you have to write about the right to vote, and how each and every individual is treated with due respect, irrespective of their caste and creed, and it is expected that they will be respected just as they are. So democracies throughout the world has recognized this in principle, at least, right? And this has been achieved through various degrees, right? Some countries have been late to recognize this principle of human dignity. Some countries were earlier, like European countries were the first to recognize, brotherhood and equality and all of that. Black people were given that recognition much later. Women, of course, were given recognition way later, right? But democracy allows that situation where people can expect to be treated equally and with dignity. And we say, and here you can give again the example of women. See, most societies across the world have been patriarchal, right? And equal treatment of women, therefore, we see are a contrast to that patriarchal dominated society. So that is why equal treatment of women was necessary for a democratic society, right? So in principle it is recognized that women should be held in equal stance with men. However, there's a lot of struggle that was done and is still being done for women to be held equal with respect to men. Have we achieved that completely? No, we have a long way to go. However, democracy recognizes this principle, and therefore it becomes easier for women to wage that struggle, right? So in a non-democratic country, however, this would not have been possible. So democracy in India has strengthened the claims of disadvantaged and discriminated caste. Again, you can mention this point for equal status and equal opportunity. And yes, there are instances of caste-based inequalities and atrocities, but we have the legal and moral foundations and the bulwark to help fight against these kind of atrocities, right? So this part more or less would answer the question to the point on dignity, right? Now, the last question here that I would like to discuss here is, can public dissatisfaction indicate success for democracy? Seems rather absurd. I mean, dissatisfaction of public, will that indicate success of democracy? Yes. Why? Because the fact that people are complaining is itself a testimony to the success of democracy, that it shows that people have developed the awareness and the ability to expect to look critically at power holders, and the public expression of dissatisfaction with democracy show the success story of democracy project in itself. And most individuals today believe that their vote does make a difference to the way the government is run and to their own self interest. Right? So, this more or less covers the board question and answers for this chapter, Outcomes of Democracy. There is, of course, an underlying question that may be asked, the differences between a democracy and a dictatorship. Now, the answer may not be apparently written in one particular nice paragraph where, you can just copy and write it. You have to pick and choose and find the answers. You have to critically think in this case. So, let's take a look at the differences between a democracy and a non-democratic government, right? So a democracy is based on the idea of deliberation and negotiation, right? It does necessarily delay implementation because there is deliberation and negotiation, but it's crucial to its functioning. Whereas a dictator will not even bother, it does not have any regard for either the majority or minorities as far as public opinion is concerned, and therefore it can be very quick because it does not have to consult with anyone. That is why dictatorships can be very quick with its decision, but necessarily that is not the correct or the right thing to do. Next, decisions are acceptable to the people, only then it can be taken forward. Dictatorships take decisions whether they are accepted or not by the people. The dictatorships does not bother, right? A citizen has a right and the means to examine the process of decision making. So there is transparency. Remember, I told you in our country we have the RTI process, right? Transparency in a dictatorship, however, is completely missing, right? And there is no accountability of the government to the people, right? So these are some of the major differences between democracy and dictatorship as far as its decision making process are concerned, right? So this more or less covers the chapter. So you can look at all of the chapters and the board question and answers that I have shared in my other videos, and do not forget to like and subscribe. Have a good day.